Alright, hello, this is Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College, and as part of the Rankin Technical College AWD, or Application and Website Development Program, I have been creating a series of video presentations based on the textbook that will be used for the AWD 1111.NET Framework with Web Databases class for the fall 2019 semester. The book, as you can see on the screen, is ProASP.NET MVC 5. It's an 8-press text by Adam Freeman. And I am in the last chapter, which is Chapter 27. And on page 763, the author starts talking about using Web API. The Web API feature is based on adding a special kind of controller to an MVC framework. This type of controller, known as an API controller, where API stands for Application Program Interface, it has two distinctive characteristics. Number one, action methods return model rather than action result objects. Number two, action methods are selected based on the HTTP method used in the request. So, as it says here, the model objects that are returned from an API controller action method are encoded as JSON. They're sent to the client. API controllers are designed to deliver web data services, so they do not support views, nor do they support layouts, nor do they support any other features that we have been using to generate HTML in the example in the other apps. All right. The tip here, the author says, the inability of an API controller to generate HTML from views is the reason that SPAs combine standard MVC framework with the Web API. All right. As demonstrated in Chapter 23, you can create action methods in regular controllers that return JSON to support AJAX, but the API controller offers an alternative approach. This approach separates the data-related actions in the application from the view-related actions. All right. As it says, it makes creating a general-purpose Web API, author's words, quick and simple. So, adding Web API to an application is also, again, author's words, incredibly simple. In part, this is because we're going to create a basic web service, but also because the integration with the underpinnings of the MVC framework means that little work is required. All right, it says I created a webcontroller.cs file in the controllers folder, and we're going to use it to put in this. So let's do that first. Yeah, we won't even do it like that. We'll do it the way we've been doing it. So here is our web controller. The code is shown on pages 763 and 764. Space it out just a little bit here. That is all that is required to create a Web API. The API controller has 5 action methods that map the capabilities of the repository and provide web service access to the reservation objects. Whoops. The author says here he will explain how the API controller works shortly, but first we're going to perform a simple test. Start the application. Once the browser loads the root URL, navigate to the API web URL. The result you see will depend on the browser you're using. If we're using IE, we should see something that looks like this. If you navigate there using a browser like Chrome, we should see it, rather than in JSON, we should see it in XML. Now, again, this is a few years ago that this book was written, so let's see if indeed that's the case. We will do our file save all, and we will run the application. And once it comes up, we will come over here and we will iterate through the /API/web. And as you can see, we literally have created, we have the XML file here. XML rather, if you do not know, stands for Extensible Markup Language. This is not at all going to be a primer or anything else on XML, other than to tell you that back in the, I don't know, 80s or 90s, I don't know when it was, people said they had enough with HTML, and they needed a language that would do things that HTML couldn't do. All right. So one of the things that was offered up was XML, the Extensible Markup Language. The big difference that's in there is when you use XML, you make up your own tags. All right, that leads to a lot of other things that I'm not going to get into at all right now. All right, I will tell you, and hopefully if I can't find it right away, I'll just leave. Let's see. I'm going to type in here O'Reilly XML intro article. This is quite a few years old if it's, let's see, PDF introduction to XML. It's not what I want. So in a nutshell, I think this is it. A technical introduction. Looks a little different, but I sort of remember that. You'll notice 20 years old. But if you do want an overall, or an overview, I should say, of what XML is all about, you can go out to there. All right. Okay, let's close that. Says there are a couple of interesting things to note here. The first is that the request for the /API/web URL has produced a list of model objects and their properties. The second point of note is that different browsers receive different data formats. All right. Again, I don't even know. It looks like on here, and part of this is, I'm not making an excuse here, but I want you to know that the only thing that I've loaded on here, I didn't load any browsers, so it is finding here Chrome, and I don't know if I can browse with, let's see, try to browse with Edge. I can add that, and they want the program file, etc. Really want to do that. I was hoping like I could add IE and I wouldn't have to put that stuff in there. See, but it says that it needs all that information. I wanted to be able to kind of run that and show you what it looked like in JSON. I'm not gonna go through that right now though. All right, the different data formats they mentioned here are used because the web API uses the HTTP Hypertext Transfer Protocol accept header contained in a request to work out what data type the client would prefer to work with. IE gets JSON because that's the accept header it sends, where it appears as though Chrome gets XML. All right. Page 765, understanding how the API controller works. You will understand a lot more of how the API controller works by navigating over to API Web 3 URL. So let's do that. I think I closed it. Yes, I did. All right. Well, again, in here, this isn't showing very much, but it's just showing the last record or the last reservation object that's in there. So you will see either the following JSON or the equivalent XML. This time the web controller has returned details of the reservation object whose reservation ID is 3, the last one that we put in. The format of the URL and the use of the URL segment should remind you of what we went over back in Chapter 15. API controllers have their own routing configuration, which is completely separate from the rest of the application. I already opened that file up so you could see it. This is one of the files that Visual Studio adds to the project when you click the Web API checkbox. So that was it right here. And the author says, the Web API config.cs file contains the routes used for API controllers, but uses different classes from the regular MVC routes defined in the route config.cs file. The Web API feature is implemented as a standalone ASP.NET feature, and it can be used outside of the MVC framework, meaning that Microsoft has duplicated some key MVC framework fundamentals in the system.web.http namespace, and you can see how that's included in here. And what is shown on the screen here, all right, this is the first time I think I've seen this. The contents, oh, this, I'm in the wrong one, that's why. Okay, 757, what did I do here? 766, that's where I want to be. All right, it's down here, there we go. So they talk about the contents of the global ASAX file. I'm not sure if that one is in there or not, so I'm going to grab that, open up the global ASAX file, and you'll notice this global configuration, the one right here, is indeed in there. The result is that the application has two sets of routes, those used for the MVC framework controllers and those used for the Web API controllers. Again, we're doing this very methodically. I'm already up to 14 minutes. We're only on page 767, but that's life. And I'm going to stop right here because we've only gone through right now about 12 or 13 pages. But we're going to stop right here and continue on in the next lesson with understanding API controller action selection. Be back with that shortly.